Okay then, so at the top we've got our track, as you can see there in yellow, and then in blue basically we've just got a commercial mix, a couple of them there. I'll explain why in a minute. It's obviously just to compare our tracks to them, so we can get a ballpark sort of FFT analysis and what have you, and get our tracks sounding right. So to start, let's just have a look at our mastering chain. We always have a page like this in a sequencer set up without anything else on, with basically all our plugins which we might need to use already set up, just so we don't have to bring them in. One thing's for sure, we won't have to use more than what we've got there, so it's just a case we don't have to bring them in. So the tools that we use for mastering, generally in the following order of these. So we'll start off with the Abbey Road EMI plugins by Chandler. Basically what these are, I'll open this one as well. Okay, basically what these are broadband EQs, kind of like based on sort of Pultec type EQs. They're very broadband. We use these now because the mix down should be pretty much bang on.
It is. It's bang.
Says Rick. It's sounding sweet. It's right there. Basically, we just use broadband stuff now for sort of sweetening certain frequencies, such as opening up the top end of the mix, cutting the mids to clear, or boost a bit more sort of weight and body in there, or cut the bottom end for a bit more weight. Sorry, add cut various frequencies, and we'll boost various frequencies to add more weight or lighten things up, depending on how we feel. We basically also add a TG12414, once again by Abbey Road. Once again, it's broadband, but we use these to shelf the top and the bottom of the tracks off. It does it in a very smooth analogy way, nothing too brutal, and it's also got a presence control. We very rarely use that because we use the other EQs to give us presence, but if we need a little bit more somewhere, between 500 and 10k, we use that once we get there. Let me just take them off for you, make a bit of space on the old screen. Right, then we have a sort of tighter selection of EQs. I'm sure we've bumped into these if you got the How to Write a Track DVD. Flux. I'll just open them all up and then talk you through it. So we've got the Flux E Pure 2, which is fantastic. The SPL graphic EQs, the full Ranger and the bass Ranger, and the BX Digital, the biggest plugin interface in the world, but it is very good. Okay, so we've got that lot. Basically, we do have these here when we've basically shaped the tracks with the broadband EQs, the Abbey Road stuff. You can use things like Pultec emulation, stuff like that. Often we find that if there are any sort of more more precision problems that have come to light, we then obviously use a tighter EQ, because you aren't going to zone in on a tiny frequency with really broad EQs. So we have the selection there just in case. Each one sounds a bit different. They all sound absolutely wonderful in their own right, but do have different flavors. So we have them sort of stacked up and ready to go. Just in case, I'd love to say that once we've done the broadband EQs, mastering is done, we compress and limit, and it's hey presto. But even with this, often we'll find problem frequencies, little bits here, little cuts that need to be made. So that's why we have them. Hopefully we won't have to use them, but I expect we'll need to use at least one of them a little bit. Then we basically follow on with the Brainworks once again, the BX Control. We don't monitor levels, we don't basically use this for monitoring levels. It's generally we use it for stereo widening, which is there, and also this little dial which pushes your track into mono, so it reduces your stereo track into a mono track. It's a good idea to do that. A lot of club systems are still in mono, and if you don't check if it sounds good in mono, when you get your lovely stereo mix into a club, bang it out on a mono system, if you've got phase problems, you're going to have parts of your track disappear and it's going to sound absolutely rubbish. So you don't want to do that, obviously, so do check it in mono. So we use that for that. Stereo widening is really good as well. You don't want, with any stereo widening, you don't want to frap it really wide because weird things start to happen. Your mix should be pretty much there anyway, so just use it for a little bit of a push the whole mix wider. It sounds really nice. Then we move on to the multi-band compression. We only use the Flux Alchemist. Love to say that any multi-band compressor will do, and I'm sure Rick will agree with me, but unfortunately it won't.
No.
On the software side of life, it's ideally got to be the Flux Alchemist in our opinion, and that's a big full stop after that, because we do feel it has a bit of an edge over the UAD multi-band compressor, which we've used as well. But the UAD is still very good, but as far as we're concerned, this is the one. Basically anything that isn't classed as high end, and unfortunately probably has a high end price tag as well, will do far more harm than good. So we'll get into that in a bit. You can go incredibly deep. We actually use it on a fairly sort of basic level, probably because we've only had it for sort of 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, we've not had it long, but it really does blow the UAD away, in my opinion. We used to use UAD all the time, didn't we? But this really has overtaken it. If you're mastering, you've got to use it, really.
Yeah, and we'll get into the settings as well, because they're actually in Rick's book. We'll talk you through them. Basically, general ballpark settings, which are good to get to start from, because you can be totally overwhelmed, and if you're not aware of anything to do with compression, you're gonna royally sod your mix up with a piece of tackle like this Rapido. So do sort of start with ballpark settings. It's got some presets in there. We use sort of Rick's own presets. So I mean that's a fantastic bit. After that, basically once again, as with the mix down, we obviously mixed kind of on the mix down through the bus compressor, the SSL. Quite often we'll pop this on again after it all, and we're talking minute settings, but once again, we haven't experimented with what if you put a track through this 1,000 times, but I'm sure it sounds 1,000 times better than it did if you didn't. So we generally put that on again, which is fantastic. And then finally onto limiting. As with all the plugins that we use, they are all they're regarded as the best of the best, and they are. Not any limiter will do. We're once again personally only happy with a Flux Pure limiter 2 for what we use. We've heard, I guess the closest thing to it, UAD's precision limiter, which is brilliant, nice piece of work. But and the Sony stuff's pretty cool. But any day we choose a Flux. Yeah, it just does what he says on the tin.
The UAD's a bit sharp, and I find it cuts it down a bit too much.
There's something about the Flux, don't know what they've done. I'm not a tech head as far as programming code and stuff, but it feels like you've got a piece of hardware for once. It doesn't feel like a digital emulation, and it's probably due to the fact that they're not trying to emulate a piece of hardware digitally, and I've been waiting years for someone to do that. I don't care about old hardware. I want someone to write a brilliant piece of software that does what it's meant to do in a really nice way, and Flux have nailed it, frankly. So nice one to that lot. Then finally, at the end of the chain, we have a FFT analyzer. If you just get this running, if I'll mute it off, just so I can speak to you in a minute. Basically, it's just to show an FFT analysis of our track. Once again, we'll go into this why we've got these 2 other tracks there, other sort of professional commercial mixes, because you can actually tell a lot by looking at the shape of a track. I'm sure a lot of professionals will kind of frown at that, saying use your ears, but we do use our ears, but it's also good to have a visual reference.
Yeah, I think it's fine saying use your ears, but you do have to have an acoustically treated room, which, I mean, luckily enough, we have, but
yeah.
If you don't have one and you don't have monitors that can really replicate that bottom end, FFT is the only way you're going to be able to do it. Even
on poorer quality monitors, you're going to hear this pretty damn good, to be honest, up this range. But right down the bottom here, you ain't going to be hearing that. We're talking 20, 30 hertz, and yes, you do sort of roll off generally about 40, but there's still frequencies down there which are important, which will add weight to the track. So you can see if there's any problems knocking down there. So mastering, it's important to have a visual reference. Also, we use the BX control now just to monitor the levels, which is the peak against the RMS. BX Brainworks have actually put a red line on here, which we talked about when we were sort of arranging and making a track a little bit. But basically, if there's about 9 dB, if this levels, once we start limiting, the peak will be hitting a little bit 0.1 under 0 dB there. But basically, if you're limiting further than this red line, 9 dB, in sort of Brainworks is sort of manual, sort of that's getting a bit too hot and you're squashing out of dynamics. But you'll notice that if you stick this on 99% of dance tracks, I guess the pros of the pros do limit to that line, but most people go a little bit hotter than that. We certainly do. So sorry, Brainworks, you'll have a little line there saying hardcore or something like that. So we generally sort of go, I guess, about 7 or 8. But once again, we'll have a look at some other professional tracks, and we'll, that we like, and we'll sort of follow that flavour. But I can bet you it's going to be a bit more hot than 9 dB. So those are generally the tools. Okay, so basically to start with, before we get into anything, it's worth mentioning, and this is really worth mentioning, it's strongly advisable to use a proper mastering engineer. We ourselves aren't proper mastering engineers, and we're producers and engineer tracks, but mastering engineer is very different role. The main reason being that an engineer will have him or her will have a totally fresh pair of ears and be able to hear your track from a totally unbiased perspective and be able to actually listen to it as a whole, which is very hard to do when you've been writing it for a week or whatever. Also, the experience gained from just mastering tracks for years on end will be far beyond yours and our sort of experience levels for that matter. Obviously, you, like us, we write tracks. Mastering engineers just master tracks, or a lot of them do, and most of the time that's what they are doing. He or she will also most likely have a proper full range pair of monitors, and we're talking cost absolutely thousands, and a properly treated studio to do the work in, and that's out of most people's price ranges. And obviously, when you've got a treated studio, you're not going to have nodes in the room and cancellation points, and you can be sitting there listening to your bass and think that's right, and you'll be sitting in a node and half your bass won't even be there, and such mistakes. So it is worth paying. Basically, if you're releasing professional tracks that are going to sell probably more than 1,000 copies, it's worth it in our opinion, to get it professionally done. But saying that, there's a lot to be learnt and a lot to be gained, including saving a load of money. Most of you will want to have a pop at mastering yourselves, and that's all good. And this is why we're doing this little bit. Okay. There's also, if you intend on playing your stuff out and not use a professional mastering engineer, hopefully this little section will point you in the right direction. It will certainly help you get the best out of your tracks and prevent you from damaging someone's sound rig with some dodgy levels, and that can't be a bad thing. And at the end of the day, if a lot of people are listening to your tracks and they're having a good night, you don't want to ruin it. Okay. So there's many ways to go about this, but obviously we can only show you the way that we do. So to start with, just start by listening to your track. So you've probably heard this a few times now. And just have a listen just to the general levels and what have you. See if there's anything that's really getting on your tits, anything like that. But when you're listening to it now, really listen it to a whole. This might only be possible if you haven't heard it for a couple of weeks or more. Rick and I, if we choose to master, generally leave a track for about a month before we attempt to master, so to gain some sort of separation, albeit for this one we could only leave it for a day, so we're very close to it still. That's an understatement. And obviously doing this DVD and what have you for you, we're incredibly close to it and heard it far more times than if we'd just written it and sort of released it. So if there's any really glaringly obvious problems at this point, it's a case of sorry mate, but time to go back to the mix and correct these before even attempting to master. As when writing a track, you can't polish the proverbial turd, and you can't make a rubbish mix sound great through mastering. It's as simple as that. You can make a really good mix sound really nice, but you can't polish rubbish. So if all's okay, then we're basically set to crack on. So basically what we're doing now, if we just have it, generally it's sounding pretty ballpark nice, that, to be honest. I can hear a few adjustments that need to be made just by listening to it. But a good thing to do now, muted that off. Right, a good thing to do now is basically, if we go to one of the commercial tracks, and just play these along. let's just mute ours off as well, because actually what we're going to do here is just actually have a visual look at it. We need that one open as well. So if we loop the tracks around, we're not going to play these commercial tracks incidentally, because we have our favourites and we don't want to give out our sort of keys, I guess, to that point. But we don't want to get into trouble. But just trust us, there's nothing clever about them. They're tracks which you can hear on iTunes or Beatport or whatever like that. Nothing fancy. So what we've got here, let's just open this. So basically, here's our track at the top, and there's the professional tracks down there. Now, if we just get it looping up here, where things are a bit more full belt, you can already see here. I mean, to be honest, our bottom end down this bottom is looking pretty damn good. Okay, we can see here, I mean, that track's obviously a little bit more. We can see here that we're sloping off here, and we could do with a little bit more energy up this level here. Okay, compared to there, that's pretty much, I mean, that's quite full bore there, and so is that. So if you just make a note, obviously make sure that all of these are set. You're not zoomed in on anything, so you're going to get a different reading. Just use this sort of FFT at the basic levels. You can kind of, let's just get that looping where it's banging away again. Just make a mental note. You can see here that the tracks generally hugging this line, which is -40 there, and the same with this one, and then shelving off from 5, going gradually down. This one's a little bit more up front, you'd expect that, and it is, that track to be more in your face. But you can see from ours, we've got more energy around the 500 mark. I mean, there's no point even listening to the track, because you'll be amazed what you can pick up by just looking. This is generally the mud zone. So basically what we know is we can pull out some of that area there, and what it do is clear the track up. So all of these tracks, very, very clear around this area there, where you'll pick up quite a lot of mud. Okay. Also, once again, these levels here, we can bring this up with a multi-band compressor with the flux stuff, because what we'll do is we would have a band which would split there to about 2k, and then up to about 5k, and then 2 more right up to the top end, so we can control these levels independently anyway. So generally, the chances are that these peeps tracks were generally probably looking a bit like our shape anyway, which is a sign, it's a good mix, so it's going to look pretty right.
I think it's important to mention that you do find a lot of tracks sound very, very normal until they're mastered, and it's once they're mastered they come out sounding just special. But until then, you've got to accept that a track will sound quite just average until it's mastered.
Definitely, and you can see from ours that's a good mix. I mean, you've heard it sounds well, but also we're not a million miles away. Obviously, if we had a big dip at like a big cut, if we were reading something like that, we'd go, hang on a minute, we've got a bloody problem here. It's like we haven't got any sounds in our mix. But it's a good mix, and you can see that. So we know that, generally speaking, I mean, yes, there might be a tiny bit of correction, but generally, once again, the broadband EQs, we're going to have to shelf that beastie up there. We can see that was spiking up there a bit, but we're right there. So without much further ado, we can kind of move on a little bit. Once again, if we let me just have a look. Once again, you can just kind of look at the shapes. I mean, I personally know that I prefer this track here when we're sort of working towards. I prefer the production on it. So let me just get rid of that one a minute. We're just showing you, you can get lots up, and they will all generally have the same shape. So if we now bring up the, I'm just going to open the Brainworks. So once again, we're just having a chill, and we're having a proper analysis session here. If we bring out the Brainworks, God, lightweights. We'll be pushing. Once again, I like that track, but to be honest, we'll be pushing ours a hell of a lot more than that. I mean, that's not very, Brainworks will be happy with that, but we know that we're going to push it because we have done in the past, and we've heard our stuff on Club Systems, and it doesn't sound like we've totally crippled the dynamics by pushing between 7 and sort of 9. So that's what we're going to do. So we can close that. We're going to keep an eye on their sort of general EQ curve, but we are kind of going to limit it to our own sort of specification, which is fairly hot. Okay, so if we move on, right, now what we're going to do, to start with the FFT, incidentally, obviously you can get far better ones than this. and probably some free ones out there far better. If you're on a PC, Wavelab's got an absolutely fantastic one which absolutely drops this. This makes this one look rubbish, to be honest. So if you're on Wavelab, that's got a cool one. Also know on the PC you've got a really funky one called Penguin, which has got a penguin instead of a cursor, which I quite like. Not enough gimmicks on Macs. I need penguins and things like that, wagging dogs that go and look for things for you. Not, you know. But anyway, so basically, always sort of have a good look at the spectrum analyzers and have a look at your peak RMS meters here, as we did here. You can see with our track that we're pretty hot anyway. Once again, it's a good mix, but we will be pushing that right at the end a bit hotter. So that's basically that. Okay, so on we go. So to start with, we'll open the Abbey Road, we'll get our track running and have a little tweak. Once again, this area, no, we're going to have to cut some out of. Okay, as simple as that. I might have to cut a little bit of the bass out a bit. Who knows? Let's have a listen. Okay, so once again, as suspected, you can see, right, that's a ridiculous cut, but this is the area. 256, 300, 512's a bit high for it, but this is generally where you're going to find your mud. As you can see here on our spectrum analysis, we've cut ridiculous amounts, but it has cleared up the track. And if we bring that in, the track will get more. If we boost that, it's like, ooh, it's all a mess, it's all horrible, it's doing me head in, there's too much body there. So what we do is generally just pull a little bit out. Okay, when I'm doing this, well, when I did that, because that's right now, go with the EQ, go with the ears first, and then look at the spectrum analysis. Don't do it the other way around, obviously. Also, down the bottom end, I'm hearing that we do need right at the bottom end. We boost that quite a lot down there. So on a nice thud at the bottom, not too much. I think, to be honest, that's about right for that. That sounds pretty cool. So once again, onto this. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get into this for a bit. Not going to explain why I've done what I've done. I'll bypass the EQ at the end, so then you can listen to the sort of before and after. I'll just bypass that first one that we've just done, which once again, this one. Once again, we're clearing out that section there a little bit and taking out a little bit of the really, really low bass. So if I just take this off. I mean, that's quite big the difference, you see. A bit muddy, a bit cloggy, a bit messy. Okay. Just clears it out, just gives everything a little bit more space. So I'm just going to get into this one for a bit. Okay, so once again, although I've got the analyzers open, at no point did I look at them at that point. So once again, I'll just bypass it. All we've done, we've boosted around 91, so that's going to give the sort of kick drum area a bit more punch. 181, we've cut once again. We've taken out some more of this muddy area around here. We can see here, if you look at the analyzer, it really is, it's thin on the ground around here. Ours is a little bit full on there. But I did the correction first without looking at the FFT, so do it by your ears and then just see, it's a good confirmator to have a visual reference. So that was cool. I boosted up 3K. We can see here, nice and flat. A lot of that's to do with compression, but a lot of it's also EQ. We can see ours dips down there. We were aware when we first sort of had a look that we were going to need to boost there and boost higher as well. So we did that 8K boost. That's where we were, and also around here, and we end up with this. So it's opened it up nice. It's just like, whoa, you know what I mean? I was going to swear then, but you know what I mean? Beep. But it's an 18. All right, I was like, fucking hell, that's starting. Once you start to feel it, so I just bypass that again. A bit dull, a bit messy, and now, oh nice. So if we take both of them off now, I mean that sounds pretty crap. I mean I think this is the point with mastering, is that although we had listened to the mix down, we're like, and you were probably thinking to it, it's not blowing our trumpet, but it's a nice mix. Rick's done it, it's nice, sweet, but it's like you're listening to it and you're going, that's a pretty nice track. But then when you actually start to sort of master stuff, even though we've just got a couple of EQs on at the moment, it makes the tracks sound rubbish when they're not on, and that means no, you're on the right path. You're making something which was really nice even better, and the sort of difference comes strikingly obvious. So we'll start like it was, when we first listened to it, which sounds all right now that we're not used to it with the EQ, and then that's pretty sweet. So anyway, then we move on to the presence. Now, once again, one thing that you really have to be aware of is not only the bottom end but also the top end and the shelving. Okay, you can see here, we really need to be showing off there. When that's cranked out on a 100k rig, it's going to be really in your face. If you turn this up now, it'll sound well, but if you imagine that 100 times louder, it's going to be too much. You're also going to have vinyl skipping and all sorts of stuff. Also, to cut into CD, this is going to cause numerous problems. So basically, we generally cut at 15k. You already see immediately this lovely edge that comes on there. So we take that off. You can see all of this rubbish up here, all this sizzle we actually don't need. So we take that down. I'll just crank it up. Once again, at 12k it starts to get a bit dull. 8k, 10k, too dull. But if we go from 15, we've still got a sizzle there. We've got a lovely shape that's not going to cause problems. If we open it to 20, not really much benefit going on, apart from you're going to wreck sort of pressing plants, sort of ability to press vinyl and stuff. So 15, that's fine. Also with the low end, obviously we don't want to go up that high. Just drop it down, drop it down. Once again, with this very low end, I'll keep an eye out on the FFT. We want, as in our commercial mix, sort of bobbing between -10 and -15, generally speaking. And we've got that there. If we go up to 40, dropping a bit lower, I kind of like the sound of that. I think that's a little bit too low for this track. We'll take it to 40 and that's cool. Now, let's just have a listen there a minute. Just wonder if any presence is needed anywhere. Just a little boost and just see if anywhere's going to benefit. Now when we move through that mix, we'll give it a little bit more. 500, 800, 1.2. To be honest, it's all in your face wherever we go there. So I actually don't need, with this mix, we don't need any presence. But it's worth, do we need to cut any presence anywhere? Is anywhere really getting on your nerves? It's like, well, not really. That sounded pretty nice. Simple as, so we won't bother with that. As far as corrective EQ goes, I don't think we need anything drastic. I am sensing just around with the. I think we'll go for the graphic EQ. There really isn't a major problem anywhere. There's a little bit getting on my nerves, I think probably around 5 and a little bit. We're in there. We're talking tiny weeny bit. 230. Yeah, there's sort of a bit of a harmonic there. Cut it out. And sweep backwards and forwards, you know. We're talking tiny bits here. Yeah, that's fine there. Okay, don't think we need any, you know, once again, we don't need any Brainworks. But now what we do is, and this is where you pray that when you move into mono, that your track doesn't disappear, okay? Okay, so once again, that's how it's going to sound, okay? We've got a bass line in there, we've got sub, we've got mids, lower mids, upper high, basically we've got a full frequency range, and your track's going to be alright nicked up, so you can breathe a sigh of relief when you get to there. Okay. Also, you can keep an eye on the correlation meters on such instruments as this. You want your correlation meter around +1. If it's dipping down here, you've got a major phase problem. You've mixed it all wrong, and it's time to go and buy Rick's book or read it again and learn how to do it. Because, you know, it's very rare that will happen, to be honest. Even if you've got like loads of phases flying around, all sorts of things like that. So we're finding mono, and we'll have a little mess around with the stereo width now. So once again, that takes into mono. If you go too wide on the stereo width, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to sound absolutely rubbish. So once again, you know, it's starting to sound forced there, but yeah, we can have it about there. That's certainly about right. So now, snare roll. Time to go on to our favourite bit of tackle. Well, actually, Rich is the SSL, but mine's this. I won't tell you porkies. Right. Okay. So this is basically my favourite bit of tackle of all time as well. SPL, Transient Designer, and actually numerous things. But this is fantastic. Now, just because it's a 5-band multi-band compressor, obviously that's a professional level of multi-band. You don't have to use 5 bands. You can zone in on problem frequencies. You can use it as a 1-band if you want. A bit overkill though. But you can use as many bands as you want, but we always tend to use it as a 5-band multi-band compressor, generally speaking, just because we're control freaks and we like to have that level of tweakability. Now with Flux, they do know what they do and they have some excellent presets, but we generally use Rick's own presets to start with. It's just a good ballpark sort of place to go. So basically on band 1, we're kind of obviously got the sort of, this is tighten up the bottom end of the mix. The frequency range is 0 to 180, approximately ratio 5 to 1. Threshold 3 dB below the quietest notes, so that the compressor is permanently triggered. So I mean, basically, if we go on the threshold here, we have a look at the meters here. Let me just push that up a little bit. If we push it right out, you can see the threshold. I'm pointing at the screen there using my mouse. The threshold is actually, you're not here with us, right? I was getting confused there. Threshold's actually above the sound there, so we're not getting any gain reduction. So generally if we start to pull it down, you'll start to see it pump here, okay? So we want it generally 3 dBs below. Okay, so I mean anywhere about there. Okay, I've already set these releases up. Generally you want the attack between 10 and 20. Release 130 to 190. We're at 180, 138. I think we saved this preset from the last time we used it. And then basically want to increase the output gain 3 to 5 dB. Okay, so even if we're doing it a bit raw like this, we can always, this is a good ballpark to get going with, and we certainly always just start like this. So I'll solo these as you go along, so you can hear the separation, and you can also hear how damn good this compressor is, because it's these crossover points here between where the compressors have set, where you usually have your problems, and that's as smooth as hell, almost uncannily so. So if we just take that off, go to the next band. So on to sort of band 2, this is generally set 180 to about 160. The purpose of this is to tighten up the rhythm section and the mix in general. The ratio generally 2.5 to 3.1. Threshold, and once again we've got no compression there, as you can see, but threshold. So we're just above the quietest note, so it's triggered but not continually. Okay, so if we bring that down, you can just see that it's just popping just there. We'll bring that down a little bit more. Just do the, once again, these are just ballpark things. Release, we've already got that set at 148. You want it between about 130 and 160 in our experience. Obviously other engineers and what have you will have their own setups, but these work for us and have time and time again. So stick with what you know. We don't mind sharing these things with you, obviously, particularly those that have paid for this DVD and haven't ripped it off a torrent or something like that. Tossers. But anyway, on we go. So generally, and we want to increase the makeup gain by about 1-3 dB, so we'll push it to about there. We'll balance as we go along. It's okay, we'll rearrange, do these separately anyway when it's all together. Moving on to band 3, we'll just take the sole off that. So band 3, here we go. So generally, this is to add some weight to the mix and increase the energy of it. Generally speaking, we have it set up, the crossover, between 160 Hz to 1.5 Hz. Ratio about 3:1. Once again, the threshold we have below the quietest notes, just so it's continually triggered. So if we go to about there, we don't want too much at this point. Once again, we're always going to tweak a little bit more. Fairly fast attack, 15 milliseconds, generally between about 15 and 25 milliseconds. And release about 100 to 130 milliseconds. We keep it bang on in the middle. And basically, once again, just increase the gain up by about 1-3 dB. We'll have it around about there. So once again, you can hear that. We'll move on to the next band. Just take that off slowly. So band 4 now. So this is basically the area where you're going to increase the clarity of mid to high frequency instruments, and you can hear that it's soloed, mid to high frequencies. And this is where you're going to get the clarity, that's where you're going to get the cut and where you're going to get the bite. Frequency, the crossover set between 1.5 to 8 kilohertz. Ratio generally 2.1. To around 3.1. I'll put it at the higher end of the scale to start with. We'll give this track a good crushing. Threshold, you want it just above the quiet notes, just so it's triggered. Just not all the time, once again, just so it's flashing away there. You can see the makeup gain here. Very intuitive on this. Attack, fairly fast attack again. Anywhere between 5 and 10 mil. That's close to these 240 milliseconds. That'll do us. And once again, you want to increase the makeup gain, because obviously it's compressing, pushing down the level. Increase it up 1-4 dB above. So we'll start there, and then finally we go on to the sizzly high. Basically, this is what Rick classes and I do is these sort of unwanted artifacts region. This is where you get the sort of rough and harsh top. This is all in Rick's book, but I hope you appreciate sort of reading it out in case you haven't got it. So this is where you're going to get the sort of harshness in the mix, and as you can hear, if you played that zingingly loud at you, it's just going to make you want to puke. This is where you do have to control the tops as well as the bottoms. Generally, sort of crossover for the compressor, the 5th band set between 8 and 16 kilohertz, ratio 2 to 3.1. Don't want to compress it too hard. We don't want to make it too sort of hard and metallic. We just want to control it a little bit up at the top. Once again, you want the threshold just so it's triggered occasionally on the highest peaks, just to pull them down. You don't want to sort of brick wall the top. You still need that sort of life and that sort of soul up there, that sort of sizzly soul, the sort of air, if you like, ultra air. But you do need to control it a little bit. Once again, fast attack, 5 milliseconds to generally just fast, 1 to 5 it'll do. We have it about 4. Release 100 to 140, 133 will do. And once again, we'll increase the makeup gain. Now, to start with, when we go on this, when we get it all going once again, you can already hear that's blooming too harsh, that. So once again, we'll bring this down. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shut up for a little bit and mess around with the levels, just the output gain to start with before we go into any sort of further controls now. doing here is just band 3 temporarily disappeared on us. So I'm just resetting the frequency range a little bit to where I feel we need to be crossing over. Now, as you can sort of see when we've been doing this, once again, audibly it's starting to sound a lot nicer. Once again, you can sort of hear, sounds nice. It's just pulling it all in together a little bit more, giving it all a little bit more power. Some bypass. Sounds fairly flat. Yeah, you can hear, well, yeah, that's alright. But that's just giving it a little bit, come on. You know, that sort of vibe, and that's what you want for a club, obviously. Bypass. And with the compressor on, so we just pull down the bass a little bit. Right, I'm just going to crank this up in the studio really, really loud for a minute. Well, that's sounding pretty well to me. At the end of the day, you can hear with this, you know, although it's a multi-band compressor, it sounds like, God, this is going to change my life. It is very subtle in what it's doing, and that's why, you know, you can tell it's an extremely good plugin. If you put on cheap multi-bands, you'll do a little bit and it'll sound like, Jesus, my track's almost changed. And if you actually separate from it and listen, is it good without it, or without it, you'll go, actually, it's just ruined my track. You can hear with this, it's very, very fluid. Whatever it's doing, it's not adding any crap whatsoever, and that's really important to realise. I wish you could get these things for cheap, but that's not the case. You know, you have to pay for good stuff. It's your music that's going through. It's really important. So just without, once again, and with. Now, with the flux stuff, I mean, this thing's miles ahead, like literally. Probably, technically speaking, about 3 or 4 years at the moment ahead of other sort of multi-band compressors, including UADs. An amazing amount of control. Not going to go into it too much at this point. One thing which I will do though is the bittersweet. Now, we mentioned this on sort of writing a track, this little plugin, because you can actually get it for free. It's like a transient designer, but what you can do is transient design each sort of, you know, each band of your compressor basically. So I mean, basically, if I just grab this area here a minute, I'm just going to show you this, because actually at the moment don't really feel that we need anything with this. Don't like to overcook stuff, don't like to use stuff just because it's there. But for instance, with this little area here, where the bit of a snap of the kick there, you can really increase that or decrease it. So I can hear that. If we had that in the mix, it's going to make it look cut through a little bit more. I actually quite like that. I'm going to keep that. I was going to say I wasn't going to go too deep into this while we're with you. but might as well. Once again, increasing the transient on the hats. We don't want that. We want the kick to take prominence. Pull that back. And once again, we'll bypass a whole lot. Okay. Once again, sounds fairly flat, fairly lifeless really with it. And that starts to give it some real sort of boom. I'm just going to chill that bass down a little bit. We've done a little bit of transient shaping on various bands. Reduce the high end a little bit, increased around the area snap of the kit just to give it a bit more in your faceness. Reduce the bass just a little bit, the transient of the bass down there. Because generally, although this is trance and it's a lead sort of driven track, certainly for this production, we've definitely gone on sort of the full on in your face kick drum vibe. You're on the verge of sort of stinging you. So. That's what we've done. Well, not on the verge of stinging you, sounding nice, but you know what I mean, like really in your face. So that's all good. So we're happy with that at the moment. Obviously, we can go back and tweak stuff. And once again, it's almost in the manual of our productions and mastering and stuff. Once again, the bus compressor. This time we'll be using it sort of a lot milder than we were before. So. Again, just glues everything together a bit. Love it or hate it, we love it. So then finally, on to the all-important limiting. Now, do this. I mean, yes, do it by your ears, but personally, use what you can. Get your computer on your side and visually do it as well. So, once again, make sure with this it comes. If it's in auto mode, a lot of people be moaning saying, "Oh, it pumps, it's rubbish." Well, bloody switch it to manual, and you've got the best limiter on the whole planet. So, if you buy this, bear that in mind, please. It's like mildly winds me up when I read that. It's awesome. So, if we start up here, once again, you can see here. Let's just. What we'll do is we'll just open the flux. We're just going to crank this up a minute. So we're just going to have it hovering around 0 dB, and once again we'll limit it to 9. Okay. So once again, it will never clip now, but we can go hotter than that because we can, because we do. So. Some people will be looking at this saying that's too much, but that's what we do. Once again, if we push it further than that, you'll start to notice that it sounds bloody awful. It's just like, oh my god, everything's just brick walled there. It's falling apart. We don't want that. So back off a little bit. I think with this mix we'll be fairly well behaved. So once again, a check on the FFT. Once again, as we discussed when we're first analysing, we're actually doing a bit better than this one, like the other track. I quite like having a flat line across here up to around about 5k, and then it's starting to roll off. Once again, as we said, it's bouncing around on that line, and you can hear it. We've got all those frequencies around 200 Hz. Nice equal levels smacking your face. That's nice. Nice bit of bass down the bottom, nicely in control. Properly rolled off, nicely rolled off at the top. We don't want too much of this. If we started to boost around this top, it starts too in your face. We don't want too much of that. it's going to be played very, very loud in a club. So generally, that's looking good. You can crank that up, you can put that in your car and boost it as loud as you want. And generally speaking, that's pretty much sounding a nice little thing, that. Okay, so what we'll do quickly is we just take all of these off, and then you can hear the whole thing come together. Okay, obviously the levels drop there, but it would, generally speaking, it'd be around there. So yeah, you know what I mean. You wouldn't think. Well, you wouldn't be able to mix that in a club, but it hasn't got the power. So we'll just go through these steadily. I'll give you sort of 10-20 seconds before I go on to the next one, just so you can hear it come together. We're not using the E-Pure now. We are using the bass range for a slight tweak. We're not using the BX Digital, we are using the control, and this was just stereo width. Just opens it up, not too much. And the Alchemist just gives it some balls. Yes, the sound. Finding the pure limiter. Oh, see, there you go. Okay, one thing that was really important is when you're about to bounce, the plugins that you're not using, just take them off or make sure they're not switched on. Not that it's technical, but it's something to do with the word clocks. If you've got really good monitors and you put on a Logic EQ, just a Logic EQ, you will hear your track. Even if you aren't using it, you will hear your track get smaller. Okay, something to bear in mind. Take off that. High-end plugins, don't think it does it, but things like Logic saying we don't need any more analysis. We're using all of this tackle. That's what you want to be bouncing in. If you have, if you leave this open up there, even when it's open like that, bypassed, okay, you will still hear, on good monitors that is, you will still hear your track get sort of audibly smaller, and it winds me up. It's not nice. So yeah, once again, there you go. Once again, it's good to give it a break. Once again, give it a break. Get some other tracks. Put it on. I don't know. Put it in Ableton. Line it up. Burn it to a CD. Mix it with some of your favourite records. Get your mates round. Have a few drinks. Chill out. Whatever you want to do, and bang it in. Or get your mates round if you got some CD decks or what have you, or vinyl if you got if you're lucky enough to have a dub plate plant. And when they're around, they don't need to know. It's when you're when you're chilling. Lads or lasses, drop your tune in and see if anyone goes, fucking hell, that's good, or Jesus, what's that awful mess? That way you'll tell. You can drop your tune and sort of sneakily watch people sort of feet and heads, and that's it. Always compare to other people though. Your best teachers are people that are better than you. It'll always be like that. So do your absolute best to sound like other people. Don't try to abstract the art of making a nice sounding track, because a nice sounding track, there's technical reasons why it sounds like that. So learn all you can, and best of luck with it all.